Hi, this is Mr. Evans. This video is going to look at private limited companies as a form of ownership. And private limited companies are an incorporated business who are protected by limited liability. So what does that mean? Well, an incorporated business, like a limited company, means that the word corporeal, I covered this in a previous video, it means to have a body. It means that in law, Mr. Evans Plumbing Limited is a separate legal identity to its owners. The owners have houses, they have a bank account, and they might invest money into the business. They would invest, maybe £10,000 as an owner, and the value of their shares in that company would be worth £10,000. And they've invested in that business, and they bought tools, and the business has a bank account. The business can own things like tools and a van. The business can employ people, but the business is a separate legal identity to its owners. And therefore, if the business were to get into trouble and not be able to pay its debt, say, yes, the business would go bankrupt. It would become insolvent technically, and it would need to empty its bank account. It would need to pay off all its assets to settle its debt, but its owners would not be responsible for the debt any more than the £10,000 they put in. So in other words, the assets, like their personal assets, like their house and the money in their bank account, that wouldn't be touched if something were to go wrong. They would only lose the money they've invested in the business. So a private limited company is often shortened to LTD. Okay, I remember this is limited, and it's limited in that its shares aren't traded publicly. So the number of people who can own the company are limited, which is how I remember private companies are LTDs, because public limited companies are PLCs, which is obviously the same three letters as private limited company. So private limited companies, they're incorporated business whose shares are not traded publicly, and therefore ownership is often restricted to family or associates. So you know who's going to be an owner of your business if you're a private limited company, whereas with public limited companies, those shares are traded publicly on stock markets. Well, what's the benefit of having a private limited company? Well, the benefits of limited liability for the owners encourage entrepreneurship. This idea of limited liability was come up with to encourage people to start businesses. Obviously, if there's no legal distinction between yourself and the business and something could go wrong, it might put people off from starting businesses and might be a dampener on entrepreneurship. And the government wants people to start businesses. It creates jobs, it creates wealth for society. And so being able to set up a private limited company where you can put money into that business, but that limits your personal losses, was very, very important. It encourages entrepreneurship. It encourages people to take the risk of starting a business. So one of the benefits of being a private limited company is that you get limited liability, which encourages entrepreneurship. People are more willing to take a risk and potentially create a business that creates jobs and creates wealth for people. Not selling shares publicly means that ownership is retained amongst friends, family, associates. You can control who becomes an owner in your business. You can make sure that the other owners in the business share your objectives, so that there's not going to be arguments amongst the owners, which can happen in a public limited company where anyone can buy shares. There's going to be a continuity of existence even if owners change. So we looked at in partnerships how if one of the owners wanted to leave the business or were unfortunately to die, then that business would be unwound and the partnership would not be able to continue. Whereas with a private limited company, owners can come and go as they please, but the company can remain the same, which is very useful if you've built up, say, a recognised brand image that you want to continue. And you've got more ability than a PLC to decide how to allocate your profits. So what are the disadvantages? And that final advantage is linked to the fact that you can there's only a small group of owners, so you decide what to do with the profits. If you want to reinvest them in the business to make the business grow, you've got owners who probably, because you can control who they are, agree with what you're saying. So to move on to the disadvantages, it can be time consuming and costly to set up. This is in all the textbooks. I actually don't think it is that time consuming and costly to set up as a private limited company. What you need to do is register the business with Companies House. There's legal documents to fill in. There is some time and cost to it, but it's certainly not excessive. You are required to publish some financial data, which means that you've got your accounts are basically available for your competitors and other people to see, which can be a disadvantage. Limited liability might encourage excessive risk taking. If you know that your losses are limited to a certain amount, then maybe you would take some risky actions that you wouldn't take if your personal assets were on the line. So maybe you take some decisions that might put the business at risk in the future because you know that your personal assets are safe. You're only going to lose the money you've put into the business. Finally, not being able to sell shares publicly restricts opportunities for raising capital. Right, it's not as easy to raise money. If you want someone to become an owner, they have to be invited, whereas selling shares publicly invites people to put money into the business, and therefore it's easier to raise capital if you're selling shares publicly rather than just keeping them private. So some examples of private limited companies. John Lewis and Partners is an example of a private limited company. It's a very interesting ownership model where all of the employees actually become owners. So you can look into that in more detail if you're interested. JCB, the producers of mechanical plant like this digger here, they are a private limited company. But most private limited companies are sort of small businesses like this one that you might see going around with the LTD there. That implies that they're a private limited company. Lots of construction firms and things like that would fall under LTD ownership. So lots and lots of small businesses, but a few examples of large businesses as well that have this ownership structure.